Laurel Brown, Professor of International Relations and Political Science at the University of Toronto, joins us now. Thank you for joining us, Professor Braun. Of course, a highly complicated subject matter, but, when this conflict of Ukraine began in February 2022, some predicted it would take as little as 3 days for Russia to just capture the capital, Kyiv, but now it's entering its third year.
It is a grim anniversary, and this is why it is important to have perspective and context. Indeed, this was not just an expectation outside of that region, but it was the Russian expectation. And Mr. Putin believed that, in essence, he had a green light from the Biden administration, because the Biden administration had predicted that there would be some kind of military action, but failed to prevent it, and they were only going to protect NATO territory. What the Russian government at the time said when this war began was that the Ukrainian government had to be replaced, that Ukraine was not a real country, Ukrainians were not a real people, and very crucially that NATO basically had to pull back many of the things that were part of the expansion post 1997. Now that has happened. Now what has happened is that this war has turned into a meat grinder for the Russian forces and horrific losses for the Ukrainian forces and the Ukrainian people. It is a situation where you have continuous loss of life, where the tactical advantage keeps shifting from one side to the other, but neither side is entirely able to prevail. The Ukrainians have taken back about half of what Russia conquered in 2022, but Russia still holds on to significant chunks of Ukrainian territory, and the war continues with horrific loss of life.
And perhaps one would argue that the Ukraine wouldn't be able to achieve what it has without the funding from the US. Now that talks over more funding is stuck in Congress, and with both Ukraine and Russia watching this year's election very closely, talk to us about if US funding for Ukraine's plight stops, what could happen?
Clearly, Ukraine needs that help, and this is why there have been repeated appeals by not only the leadership in Ukraine, but also by the European allies in NATO that the United States should come through this package. But we also need to appreciate that the Europeans, who were doing very little at the beginning, came through with a package of their own of $54 billion to help Ukraine. Japan is now providing economic help to Ukraine. NATO is enlarging, contrary to what Mr. Putin had expected. Finland is a member, and Sweden will be a member within a month and functioning as a member. This is a strategic disaster for Russia, and the loss of lives that Russia is sustaining. They have lost more troops in this conflict than in all of the other conflicts that Russia has been engaged in since the Second World War. So we are looking at a situation where there have to be very hard questions asked, not only in the West, not only in Kyiv, but also in Moscow.
But Putin is not giving up, and it appears he appears to be waiting for Western support for Ukraine to wither away. And of course, we know the US has been a big part of that support, but European leaders continue to bolster Ukraine too. But barely 10% of those leaders believe it can defeat Russia. What would a post-conflict Ukraine look like, do you think?
We really have to define what winning and losing means in this kind of context, because let's not forget that the expectations in Moscow in this war were a very quick victory. Some of the troops moving towards Kyiv in the first few days were carrying dress uniforms in the expectations that they would have a victory parade. That has not materialized. It's not likely to materialize, because Russia really doesn't have a strategic plan where they can win. And so that is the reality on the ground. And also we have to understand that Russia wants to pretend to be a superpower. Economically, it doesn't have that kind of economic output. And Mr. Putin has to enjoy external success for domestic legitimacy. And consequently, in many ways, given the asymmetry of power, Russia is much larger, where it occupies a footprint that is very different internationally than Kyiv. Russia is a member of the Security Council as a permanent member. If Russia doesn't win, it loses. If Ukraine doesn't lose, it wins.
All right, Professor Oroborn, thank you very much for your time.